This poem can feel quite challenging because it is insanely metaphorical. It's metaphor on metaphor on metaphor on metaphor, and that can become quite overwhelming to try and read and understand. But I'm going to make sure we break them down and you fully understand all the different kinds of symbolism and metaphors that we're dealing with here. The entire premise of the poem is itself a kind of giant metaphor, because this poem, the speaker of this poem, is an unborn baby. And they are giving a dramatic monologue, which is a sort of prayer for what they want their life to be like once they're born, the things they do or don't want to have happen to them. Now, usually dramatic monologues are designed to give us psychological insights into the character who is speaking the dramatic monologue. In this case, it's not about the baby itself per se that we are getting the psychological insight to. It's what the baby represents. The baby is a symbol essentially of all humanity, but certainly that innocent, vulnerable aspect of all of our humanity. And it therefore, the insights we're gaining into what this unborn child wants for its life are essentially a comment on wider humanity and our fears, our desires, etc. This poem was written during World War II, so it's clearly inspired, influenced by the concerns of the time and what was going on with the human race, the way we were treating each other, the cruelty that existed, the pain and torment that existed. I don't think we have to have that contextual analysis going all the way through, but I think it's important in understanding why this poem, frankly, is so dark, is because it's heavily influenced by a real event that was terrifying. When we go to the opening stanza then, I am not yet born, there's an immediate pleading tone in that imperative of "oh, hear me." And it quickly becomes apparent why this pleading tone is necessary. Because what the poet does is use anaphora to keep repeating at the start of each stanza, I am not yet born, and then follows that stanza with all the various different dangers, cruelties, threats that can come to a human life. So what you end up with is this powerful juxtaposition between the intense vulnerability and innocence of not yet even being born, against what we're going to see is high levels of control, manipulation, cruel treatment at the hands of others. And so what our unborn child is doing is pleading to a higher power for protection. And that's why this is a prayer. It's a pleading to God for protection from all the cruelties of human beings. What's ironic about this poem, we'll see this actually as we actually go into the lines, but I want to mention it now so you notice it as we go through, is there is an interesting irony in that the poem is constantly pleading a higher power for a sense of control. So we're going to see lots of our speaker being completely helpless to these other threats, and yet at the same time, in order to deal with that, is having to get the help of the higher power in order to be protected from that. So it's sort of like either way, you know, we're stuck, we're helpless. And that is, of course, because we're dealing with an unborn baby. You know, they can't pick up a sword and deal with things themselves. But I think it is part of that wider metaphor. Can we as human beings ever have control over our lives and these things that happen to us? Or are we always at the whim of the higher power that can protect us, or the human beings that can harm us and control us? So keep that idea in mind. We have not yet analysed anywhere near enough to prove it, but trust me, we're going to, and you're going to see that as we go through. Considering where this poem is going to go in terms of the level of danger and threat, we start fairly small scale on the threat in this first stanza. So, let not the blood-sucking bat or the rat or the stoat or the club-footed ghoul come near me. They all symbolise essentially disease, illness. So obviously club-footed is an actual disability itself. And what's interesting about clubfoot is that it's a condition babies are born with. in the modern day we can correct. I'm not sure the degree to which it would have been correctable in 1944, but certainly today we can. I think the reason that MacNeice has chosen that is it's like from day one, you can be facing day one in existence on Earth. You are born, boom, you have something that is causing you some kind of trouble, some kind of pain. Is a reference to the way in which we can be harmed from day one of our existence. And perhaps the fact that it's being described to a ghoul, it can then take us all the way through into death as well. The idea of almost like something that stays with us and is inescapable. Whereas the blood-sucking rat or bat are animals that pose, and the stoat, are animals that pose a threat to us because they carry some sort of disease, illness, and they could pass it on to us. I think the imagery between these are also your more classic fears, things that are like quite typical childlike fears, because it seems like it's the way that something that isn't human can come to hurt you. But actually what the majority of the stanzas are going to look at is the real danger, the real threat, the far deeper one is human beings themselves. And I don't think that's necessarily a distinction that our unborn child is making. I don't think our unborn child is like, oh, let me start off with the little things and then, oh wait, no, now that I think about it, the human race is so much worse. I more think, if anything, that's a conclusion that the reader is led to make via the structure of the poem, via starting with things that we perceive to be a threat to us, these animals, ghosts. And then actually, as the poem goes and it keeps looking at the way humans are a threat to our own selves, we're like, okay, yeah, a bat is really nothing compared to a fascist dictator. Again, thinking about World War II, 1994. When we go to our second stanza and we have that I am not yet born, console me. What's interesting about that, obviously, so first stanza seeking like to be heard, next stanza seeking to be cared for. And what's interesting about that, if someone's consoling you, it suggests you're already upset. So something about human existence is already upset them, disappointed them. And we can almost take this stanza as an explanation of why are they so scared and afraid of entering the world. And the answer is going to be they fear humanity, because it says, I fear that the human race may with tall walls wall me, with strong drugs dope me, with wise lies lure me, on black racks rack me, in bloodbaths roll me. Lots of metaphors to break down there. Thankfully none of them are overly complicated. Tall walls wall me. Our tall walls are essentially limitation that cannot be overcome. A way that is physically controlled. Your freedom is limited in some way. Our strong drugs doping you is a form of medicinal control. Wise lies lure me, a form of psychological control, by, convincing you something is the truth when it is not. So all of these metaphors are essentially listing the ways in which human beings can control one another. Physical, medicinal, sort of drugs, and then psychological with the way that we communicate, the way that we use language. The final two are interesting as well, because I do still think they fit in this same semantic field of control. But this black racks rack me, control you via torturing you, control you via pain. And then in bloodbaths, roll me, control you via violence. The control is also communicated via the actual grammar of it. The human race will do X to me. The me, the individual, by being the object of the sentence, the one that the verb is being done to, and that grammar being used repeatedly, human race does X, human race does X, human race does X to me. Definitely the individual becomes the one in the position of vulnerability, and the wider human race is put in the position of power and strength and control. What is also interesting about the way that this stanza is structured, you've got the parallelism with X, Y, me, with X, Y, me, with X, Y, me, with X, Y's me, etc., etc. And that use of parallelism and asyndetic listing and the alliteration, drugs dope, walls wall, racks rack, lies lure, etc. All of these different techniques combine to create an almost nursery rhyme, sing-song rhythm to the poem. And you might be thinking, really? I don't hear it. Let me reread this as if I'm some like children's TV presenter trying to engage you with a song. It's going to be really weird considering what I'm about to say. But you'll hear it, trust me. With tall walls wall me, with strong drugs dope me, with wise lies lure me, on black racks rack me, in bloodbaths roll me. You hear it now, right? I mean, could be straight out of CBeebies. So the reason that he is doing that, partly we're dealing with an unborn child as our speaker, and so MacNeice is constantly playing with the idea of innocence and how that juxtaposes with the cruelty, the threat, the danger. And so the nursery rhyme sing-song element is the innocence, and then the actual words of the stanza are the threat and the danger. And I always think as well that whenever you juxtapose something childlike with something horrible, you actually increase the terror of it, right? I mean, think how common it is to use children in horror films in different ways. And I think that works here. There is something that intensifies the terror and the horror of the words when they are presented to us in a bouncy sing-song kind of way. Our third stanza flips things a little bit and takes more of a positive edge. So far we've had hear me, our unborn baby is desiring sort of that respect of being listened to, console me, wanting support, provide me, wanting to be cared for. What's interesting about what they want to have provided to them is it's all natural imagery. Great contrast to what we had in the previous stanza, very, very man-made, walls, drugs, black racks. Very different to what we've got here. What we have here in this stanza is MacNeice personifies nature as caring for babies. So the water is going to dandle me, which just means you're like bouncing a baby up and down on your knee. The grass to grow for me, as in I assume providing food, maybe sustenance. Trees to talk to me, social engagement. Sing to me, more social engagement in a positive way. Birds and a white light in the back of my mind to guide me. The white light is quite an obvious religious reference there to the higher power, and of course the link that God has with nature as the one who made it all. It's getting back to nature is a way of us feeling safe and secure and protected because that is God's creation. Whereas of course the previous stanza is everything wrong with us humans, with our free will and the like, and how we're using it to cruelly mistreat each other. So what you've got in this stanza is actually a celebration of nature and of faith and how they can care for you via this personification of them literally caring for the baby. And of course, again, the baby is a greater symbol for like basically all of humanity. What's interesting about our fourth stanza is the grammar. MacNeice really uses grammar in an interesting way. So I am not yet born, forgive me. So this idea that already just by virtue of being a human being, we can have done something wrong. Now, considering we've just had, well, we have religious references throughout this poem because the speaker is a prayer speaking to God, and we have our religious reference to the white light in the back of my mind. This could be an allusion to the concept of original sin. Because of what Adam and Eve did, all human beings inherently have the capacity for evil within them. And then what's interesting about what he wants forgiveness for the sins that in me the world shall commit, my words when they speak to me, my thoughts when they think me. You might have read this and thought, that grammar feels a little bit like archaic and weird, my thoughts when they think me, but it's actually very deliberate. He's using something called inverted syntax, where he's swapping around the order that the words should be coming in. And what I mean by that is, instead of saying, I think my thoughts, it's my thoughts think me. By inverting the syntax just means like the structure of the sentence. By inverting the syntax, what he's able to do, similar to tall walls wall me, strong drugs dope me, what he's able to do is place the power and control away from the individual. So the power and the ones with the control is the sins that in me the world shall commit. My thoughts are going to think me. My words are going to speak me. There is no control for our individual, for our unborn child. What is different though to that previous stanza is this time, the last time it was an external force, right? The tall walls, the strong drugs, the black rack, someone else, doing something to you. There was an external force controlling you. This time, it's an internal force. Sins, words, thoughts. And it's this idea of, even when we're just dealing as ourselves, as an individual, our thought process, we still don't have any control. We still can't necessarily be trusted to be good. There can still be a cruelty. There can still be a harm that comes from that. What he also then looks at in the second part of this stanza is the way in which, on a sort of abstract level, again, still different from the previous stanza, not on a physical level with walls or tools, but how in an abstract way others can control us. So what I mean by abstract, my death when they live me is essentially a reference to being remembered. And if you've ever watched my videos about from piano or poem at 39, you'll have heard me talk about how they explore this idea of imperfect memory and how we create others in our memories. And he's essentially making the same point, right? Is the way we can't control the way we are remembered. And it's this idea of even when you do something, let's say commit treason or murder someone else, it won't have been because you chose to do that. It will be because of traitors or they do it. So that inverted syntax is really important in constantly placing the control with others, even when it's something internal like your own thought process or your own words. They aren't even truly your own. Going to our next stanza, I am not yet born, rehearse me. This is an extended metaphor that's going to play on the idea that nothing in our lives is truly real or authentic. It's all a performance for others. Another aspect we're going to see in this stanza is essentially it suggests the whole world is against you and you are inferior to that world. In the line, in the parts I must play and the cues I must take, the word must is a modal auxiliary verb that is important in continuing this idea of not having any control over your life because you have to do this whether you want to or not. And then the metaphor of the parts I must play and the cues I must take symbolize the expected social conduct that we must follow, manners, etiquette, just what is considered generally acceptable and appropriate behavior. And what's interesting is the way the metaphor is framed is you have to have these plays and cues when old men lecture me, bureaucrats hector me, mountains frown at me, and so on and so forth. So it's like you have to, in society, you are expected to maintain a certain type of behavior in the face of this treatment, in the face of the cruelty, in the face of being belittled, in the face of being mistreated. You're expected to take it in a certain way. And that's what our unborn baby is wanting help with, learning those social cues and how they're supposed to behave. So in other words, our unborn child is essentially asking MacNeice, how do I behave in the face of some kind of adversity? And if we look at what adversity MacNeice is dealing with, so old men lecture me. So that's old men symbolizing knowledge and wisdom that you don't have because you're younger, and therefore they get to lecture you. So you're treated as insignificant because of a lack of knowledge or a younger age. Bureaucrats hector me. Hector is like bullying kind of behavior. Bureaucrats representing like government, essentially those who work for the government, those with any kind of political power treating you poorly. Mountains frown at me, white waves call me to folly, and desert calls me to doom are all interesting ones because it was only a couple of stanzas ago we had nature being presented as something that would be there for us and would care for us, and now it's being flipped that actually as well nature, at how we engage with nature and our relationship with nature, can also cause us problems, cause us harm. So mountains frown at me, I think, is just this idea of like mountains represent such long-term power and strength. They are going to long outlive human beings. So it's this symbol of power and strength and how it sort of disapproves of you because you're kind of insignificant. white waves calling to folly in the desert calling to doom is the way in which our desire to engage with nature can actually bring us harm. So white waves in the sense of like, oh, let me go surfing, let me engage in stupid behavior because I want to splash about in the sea. Or desert calls me to doom is, the desert symbolizes inhospitable environments for human beings. We cannot survive in the desert for very long without, our own resources or whatever. Lovers laugh at me is an interesting juxtaposition because, of course, lovers are supposed to be symbolic of people that care about you, whereas the laugh at has connotations of being quite dismissive and belittling. So that's a similar group of image to the children curse, in the antithesis between the people you expect to love you also treating you cruelly, and how essentially it feels like there is no one and nothing that will not treat you poorly. People with knowledge, people with power, nature, the people you love, the very children you create. And then of course our beggar fits into that because beggars are supposed to symbolize, it sounds horrible to say, but the most insignificant in society, the bottom rung of social society. And so for them to refuse your gift, that would imply that even they don't value you. They don't see you as important. So literally no one values you or sees you in any way as being great or important or celebrated or whatever. And with all of that in mind, remember the metaphor back at the start of the stanza. How do I handle that? How do I behave when I am faced with that? What are my cues I must take? Rehearse me. It's this idea of human beings have no choice but to face constant difficulty and challenge and physical and mental distress. And it's like, well, how are we just supposed to handle that? This next stanza, I think, is the closest the most direct reference we get to World War II. Because it's been phrased in the beginning identically to the first stanza, I'm not yet born, oh hear me. But and again with the second line, let not thee come near me. But what's in the meat of that line has changed, and what it's changed to is really significant. Before he had animals, now he has a different kind of animal, the man who is beast. Actually, what our unborn child is recognizing is human beings pose are worse animals than animals and pose the far greater threat to human beings. So by calling the man who is beast a beast, it has connotations of being powerful, violent, savage, and a real danger to our unborn child. And then, or who thinks he is God, that egotistical, obsessed with having power, obsessed with controlling all others. This, of course, being a potential allusion to our many leaders around the world in 1944 that sought to have absolute control over human beings and also engaged in beastly behavior, violent, savage behavior in order to achieve their ends. This stanza, like so many stanzas we've already looked at, is jam-packed in different metaphors. But what you'll notice is the common thread amongst them all is that they contain within them a fear of being dehumanized, a fear of your own insignificance, a fear of being treated as disposable, of being seen as being unimportant. So what our unborn baby is going to be asking for, oh, fill me with strength against, they're asking for the power to manage all of that happening to them. Not stop it, because of course the phrasing would suggest it's almost inevitably going to happen, but when it does happen, that they can manage it. So if we look at this attack on the individual identity, metaphor by metaphor, freeze my humanity. That coldness created by the imagery of freezing could be a reference to like emotions, empathy, so dehumanization by taking away your ability to care and feel for others. Dragoon me into a lethal automaton. Dragoon means to like coerce someone, force them into doing something that they don't want to do, and is seen as quite militaristic language because dragoon is also a name for a British regiment. And I think actually I take it back, this is probably our most explicit allusion to World War II, because into a lethal automaton, that dehumanization into a weapon of war. They don't want to be used as a means of committing violence. A cog in a machine is a classic metaphor that represents this idea of you are just one of many, you are insignificant, and again, a dehumanization in the sense that your only purpose is the serving of a wider production of something that you have no control of, this wider machine that you have no control of. We then have a thing with one face, a thing. So that repetition of thing is, of course, a part of the dehumanization, because thing is a noun that means that's something we can't give a name to. So it's like they have no individual identity of their own. And I think the one face, of course, human beings all do have one face, but I think it's a metaphor for this idea that all human beings are meant to sort of look the same, behave the same, be the same in how we act. And he also wants this strength against all those who would dissipate my entirety. So this first lot of metaphors really focused on the dehumanization. The next lot focuses on this idea of like you're disposable. And because to dissipate means to make something disappear. So dissipate my entirety, get rid of everything that you are. And it has this metaphor of would blow me like thistledown hither and thither, or hither and thither like water held in the hands would spill me. So you've got two different images there of the thistledown being blown here and there, and the water held in the hands would spill me. So first of all, with the thistledown is something that's very easily blown away. And once it is blown, doesn't really have a direction. It's very much subject to the particular wind that's blowing at the time. So it's that complete lack of control again. Someone has broken you down and left you directionless with no way of regaining any kind of control over your life is essentially what that's a metaphor for. And then the water held in the hands would spill me. You're just not cared for, right? So would spill me is the metaphor is that representing that carelessness, that lack of importance. So if water held in your hands is a metaphor for someone else who is the hands needing to care for you and look after you, the water, because you're held in their hands and they just spill you, they don't care about you. So this is, have strength against people not caring what happens to you, not caring if they destroy you, not caring if you have no control, no nothing. And these last two lines are just absolutely brutal. Like, if there was any part of you that was hoping he might have a nice Volta where he turns things around and has some hope for humanity, you're about to be very disappointed. Because he has these lines, let them not make me a stone and let them not spill me. The let them not spill me is, again, a repeated reference to the metaphor we just had of the water, and the let them not make me a stone is essentially the same idea as the freeze my humanity. Don't let them, take away all of the gentleness, the emotion, the empathy that makes me human and turn me something into cold and hard. And so it's almost this antithesis of like, there's no good options, because I think the antithesis comes from stone versus water and the opposites of those, but also the meanings of the metaphors themselves create a feeling of hopelessness, because it's like, on the one hand, you don't want them to take away your individualism, your empathy, your ability to care, your emotions, and you also don't want them to just not care about you. So it's a lack of care on both sides. You don't want to become someone who doesn't care, and you don't want them to have no care about you. The big concern, ultimately, if we think about this being the last stanza, the penultimate line of the poem, the biggest takeaway for our unborn child is they just want to be able to be who they are and care for others and have others care for them. And if they can't have that, we have just this insanely stark ultimatum of otherwise kill me. And you remember what I said about there's something about when you juxtapose children and something horrible, that it intensifies the horror? How horrifying is it to think of a baby having a suicidal desire of wanting to die? That juxtaposition is horrible. And what it does is it shows the intensity of the fear, the intensity of the disillusionment that our unborn child, humanity, feels, and thus a desire to just avoid it entirely and not go through it. Imagine you knew all the horrible, horrible, horrible things that could have happened in your life. Like, let's say you've had an absolutely horrible life coming, filled with pain and torment. Imagine you knew that from day one of your existence. Would you even want to exist? That's essentially the kind of question that MacNeice is raising and answering. He's suggesting we wouldn't want to. If we could have known before being born how cruel and messed up this world can be, remembering that he's writing during World War II and all of the horrors of that time, we would never want to have been born in the first place. Which, hands down, has got to be the most depressing end to any poem I have ever read. But man, do I adore the truth and pain that MacNeice is trying to explore here. It is really something.